He was bleeding like any other. But what poured out of that wound wasn't just blood. It was guilt. It was silence. It was everything I should have never touched. I never thought a decision made in minutes could echo through decades. But that's exactly what this story is. I don't know if you believe in that sort of thing. Fate, instinct, old woman's intuition. But sometimes you just feel it. And that morning, choked by the stench of flesh and despair, I felt it. Something inside me whispered, "That man, right there, he needs to live, even if he doesn't deserve it." You know how war days are. The lists come in, names are read, and priorities are set by people who never bleed. And we learn to obey. We learn to look the other way when a body goes still. But in that moment, something broke. He wasn't on the list. He wasn't supposed to be there. But he was. And his eyes didn't ask for help. They almost begged me to let him die. But I couldn't. I knelt down, pressed the cloth against his wound, and that's where it all began. What I didn't know was what would come after. What he was carrying, what he had done, what he destroyed, including parts of me. Because sometimes the things we save steal from us, slowly, from the inside out. This story has no heroes, just choices that can never be undone. These days I live in a little wooden house somewhere in rural Vermont. The windows face an orchard nobody harvests anymore. My hands, once steady with scalpels and tape, now shake just trying to line up the teacups on the rack. I'm 91, and every night, before bed, I leave the lamp on. Not because I'm afraid of the dark, but because in that soft glow, I see things no one else saw. I see what I hid, what I never spoke of, and most of all, the one I should have never saved. My name is Eloise Margaret Templeton. I was a nurse during World War II, stationed at a makeshift post just outside Normandy, shortly after D-Day. Most girls my age back then were learning how to sew. I learned how to stop a hemorrhage using fishing line. Sit here with me, because what I'm about to tell you was never written down. But it's never left me either. It's one of those stories that don't fit in medals or medical reports. A war story, but also a story of choice. The worst choice I ever made, and the wound it left behind. Not on a body, but inside me. And if you've got memories that only live when they're told, subscribe to this channel. This is a safe space. Sometimes, speaking is the only way we keep hearing the things no one else will. It was late afternoon when the convoy arrived, covered in dust, muffled screams, and dried blood. They didn't even bother pulling the tarp all the way off the truck. The bodies were dragged out like sacks of old flour. Some said they weren't even people anymore, just the price of war. But to me, every wounded man was a name waiting to be remembered. I'd already lost track of how many I'd tended to that week. Everything reeked of stale ether and fear, the kind of smell that sticks to your eyelids. And still, when I saw that man pulled from the back of the truck, something inside me stood up. Something that wasn't pity or urgency. It was like time froze, just for a second, to force me to look. He was caked in dirt and blood, his uniform torn in two mismatched tones that didn't belong to any regiment I knew. There was something wrong about him, not just in the way he cradled his broken shoulder, but in the total lack of ID. No tags, no name, no paper clipped to his shirt, and still someone shouted, "Not that one. He's not on the list. Leave him for the night shift." But I didn't. I stepped forward, dropped to my knees without thinking. The wound on his abdomen looked fresh. Shallow but deceptive. A clean cut, like it had been made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, or someone who wanted to hurt him with precision. The bleeding was slow, and that's what scared me. Slow bleeds are the ones that kill while you blink. He looked at me, didn't say a word, not a groan, not a plea, just stared with those sunken grey eyes, like he'd already made peace with dying right there, nameless and unforgiven. And that's when something inside me broke. I should have obeyed. I should have turned away. But the memory of my brother, Joseph, who died in Anzio, also without identification, slammed into my chest. His face erased, his body never found. And something in me, maybe madness, maybe hope, whispered, "Don't let him become one of the missing." I held that man like he was mine. With the kind of practice only instinct can shape, I pressed a handkerchief over the wound, white with little red flowers, a gift from my mother the day I shipped out. He tried to push my arm away, but his strength was gone. I was shaking, not from fear, but from something worse. Doubt. Because as I pressed that cloth to his flesh, I saw what no one else saw. A small tattoo on his wrist, hidden under grime. A number. A strange symbol. And it wasn't American. Or French. But it was too late. I'd already started caring for him. I'd already agreed to the silence. From that moment on, he stopped being just another wounded man. And I stopped being just a nurse. The infirmary where I was stationed was small, set up inside what used to be an old farm storage building. The windows had no glass, just wooden frames covered in stained cloth that flapped in the warm wind. A wind that carried the smell of straw, laced with death. There was a room in the back, a locked space most of the nurses avoided. They said it was haunted. But in truth, that's where we stored the morphine and the few supplies we had left. No one went in there without permission. That's where I took him. I waited for the shift change, rolled him on a barely working stretcher, covered his body with sheets, and walked with purpose. I didn't look at anyone, just kept pushing, with the kind of confidence war teaches you. If you look like you know what you're doing, no one asks questions. And no one did. Maybe they were too busy with the other screams. Maybe they just didn't want to know. When I locked the door from the inside, I stood there, breathless. He watched me without a word. Only later did I notice his hand was trembling. Not just from pain, but something deeper. He looked at me like he couldn't understand why he was still alive. "I need water," was the only thing he said that first day. And even that felt strange. The accent. It was almost American. But there was a drag to it, like the words had learned to hide before leaving his mouth. I cleaned his wound with slow, deliberate motions, took off his torn shirt, and saw more scars than I expected. They weren't just battlefield wounds. They were old, some bearing signs of torture. I had to swallow the nausea. "You're not going to die here," I muttered, maybe more to myself than to him. He just turned his face away. Hiding him in that room meant more than stashing away a body. It meant suspending every rule I'd been taught, the protocols, the lists, the idea of who was worth saving. He wasn't a survivor from any roster. He was an absence I was creating with my own hands. An absence that would soon grow a scent, a sound, a weight. I kept returning at night with stale bread, bandages, warm water in rusted basins. He didn't eat much, barely spoke. But one day while I changed his dressing, I saw his eyes close like it brought him comfort. Not physical relief, but some kind of refuge. Like my hands were stitching together something he'd long forgotten. Care. And that's when I realized that place, damp and airless, where even time seemed to hesitate, had become a hiding place deeper than any hole in the ground. I was hiding him from the world, but without realizing it, I was also hiding from myself everything he might be. Because in the silence between us something dangerous had begun to grow. Trust. And trust in war is a weapon with no handle. The third day was the quietest. No bombings, no trucks full of wounded, no emergency calls. Even war sometimes needs to rest. But me? I couldn't. My body ached. My back curved from endless hours. My feet raw, inside canvas shoes. But my mind circled only around him. The nameless man. The wounded one who shouldn't have been there. I couldn't tell anymore if I was caring for him out of instinct or some guilt that wasn't even mine. Maybe it was for the others I hadn't saved. Or for Joseph, who never came home. That day he was sleeping deeply, chest rising and falling slowly, as if he had finally loosened the grip of fear. The filtered light slipping through the cracks in the wall fell across his face, and for a moment he looked young, almost handsome. But it wasn't beauty that held me there. It was a growing restlessness, a shapeless question, a muffled echo. It was while I washed his blood-stained clothes that I found what I wasn't supposed to. Inside his shirt, sewn between the torn lining of the collar, something had been hidden. A small envelope, folded 4 times, nearly invisible. The corners were stiff from dirt and sweat, but I managed to unfold it. And there, I saw something that made my whole body freeze. A map, small, crude, hand-sketched. And it wasn't an escape map. It was a locator of our medical posts, of the refugee camps, of the supply convoys, all written in English. But with notes scribbled in another language I didn't recognize well. Maybe German, maybe Russian, or both. My hands were shaking. My first instinct was to tear it up, pretend I never saw it, toss it in the incineration bin and go back to my shift like nothing happened. But something inside me, the same something that made me save him, said, "Not yet." I folded the envelope again, hid it inside a little tin box where I kept my needles and buttons, and I sat there, staring at nothing. That night, when he woke up, he looked at me with a different kind of exhaustion, like he knew something had changed. But he didn't say a word, and neither did I, because now, his secret was mine too. In war, almost everything has a calculated fate. Supplies follow predetermined routes. Men march toward enemy lines with memorized maps. Even death seems to have a scheduled time and place, as if destruction itself follows a set of rules. But no one prepares you for the burden of choosing who gets to live, because when the choice isn't yours, the regret is smaller. But when you save someone who isn't on the list, no permission, no reason, you carry that body inside you. And that weight doesn't let go easily. After I found the map stitched into his collar, I started seeing the wounded man differently. Before, he was just a broken body, a stranger in need of care. Now, he was a question I didn't know how to ask. A risk I was sheltering on patched-up sheets, breathing at a rhythm that no longer matched mine. I kept tending to him like before, but my movements had changed. Less instinct, more mechanics. It was like my hands still wanted to help, but my heart was already stepping away. That strange feeling that starts as a whisper at the back of your neck and, before you know it, has taken over your entire chest. The world kept turning in the infirmary. More wounded came in, some recognizable by the blank look in their eyes, others just sacks of skin unraveling over time. I began slipping in the little things, forgetting names, mixing up trays, letting the water grow too cold before washing their bodies. The girls started to notice. I blamed it on sleep, on my aching back, on the heat. All of it true, but all of it lies. I wasn't fully there anymore. Part of me lived in the back room, sitting on a rotting wooden bench, listening to a silent man remind me of everything I was supposed to forget. One gray morning, News rushed through the camp like dust in a storm. A convoy had been ambushed. 2 of our own were dead. One of them was just a boy with crooked glasses, who'd laughed with me days earlier while we tried to decipher a doctor's handwriting. Now he lay stretched across a French roadside, covered with a filthy sheet, because someone leaked information. And inside me, something collapsed. Not shattered, but sank, like a slow descent into an invisible swamp. The kind of guilt that starts as doubt and ends as captivity. That night, I walked to the hiding place carrying a new weight. I stepped in softly, like walking on glass shards lodged inside my own chest. The man was there, just like always, half awake, half gone, breathing like he hadn't yet decided whether to stay. And I just looked, for a long time. I tried to remember why I had done it, why I chose him, why I gave him my clean linens, my hidden food, my sleepless nights, to someone who might have had a hand in the death of boys like that one with the crooked glasses. But I found no answer. I sat there for hours, hands in my lap, face wet without realizing. I didn't cry out loud. I never did. I just let the tears come the way things do when they have nowhere else to return. That moment I realized the hiding place had changed. It wasn't just where he rested anymore. It had become the place where I was hiding too. From the truth that crept like moss across the walls of our silence. I was becoming part of the mistake, part of the lie, part of the secret. And his body, even light from too many days without food, already weighed heavier on me than all the ones I couldn't save. The worst part about hiding someone is realizing that, with each passing day, you're disappearing a little right along with them. The days that followed passed like thick fog. In the infirmary, I was still the same woman, the one carrying basins of warm water, pressing gauze like someone trying to stitch flesh back together. But inside there was a new crack, invisible, growing in silence. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it spread. In the storage room, he was healing. His body, at least. The fever had backed off. The wound had started to close. He no longer struggled to breathe, could sit up for brief moments. At first glance, that should have brought me some kind of relief. I should have felt proud. One life saved. A job done well. But the truth was, the more his body recovered, the sicker I felt. I started watching everything with a slant. The way he handled his few belongings, how he adjusted the sheets without ever unfolding them completely, how his eyes always hovered near the door, even when his back was turned. He wasn't just a survivor trying to hang on. He was someone who knew what it meant to be hunted, someone who lived in a state of constant readiness, and it gnawed at me. One morning I did something I hadn't done yet. I waited for him to fall asleep and rummaged through what was left in his pockets and supplies. I needed to understand what was holding up that silence. Maybe I was searching for an answer that would finally set me free. Or worse, one that would confirm everything I feared. That's when I found something he should have never had. It was a metal tag, but not American. The name was scratched, almost gone, but still legible. Beneath the name, an identification number that didn't match any of our systems. And below that, a symbol. Small, discreet, etched into the lower edge like a brand of iron. 3 interlocked triangles wrapped in a broken circle. I didn't recognize it right away. But the way it had been hidden, sewn into the inner folds of a torn jacket, tucked under the lining, said more than any explanation could. I clenched the tag in my fist, like gripping a secret too hot to hold. I felt the sweat slide between my fingers. This wasn't random. It was identity. And worse, it was belonging. That night, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't even light a candle. I just sat at the edge of the bed, listening to the wind slipping through the cracks in the infirmary walls like it was whispering my name. The war was out there, sure, tearing through trenches and hills. But the real detonation I felt inside me, what I had hidden, might not have been just a deserter. It was someone who belonged to something else. Another side, another mission. And that was when, watching my own shadow flicker across the wall, I realized something that still chills me to this day. From the moment I hit him, he never once asked why I saved him. Never said thank you. Never hesitated. It was as if he already expected it. As if he knew from the very first second that I would say yes. That's when I knew. He didn't want to be saved. At least, not in the way I thought. As the days went by, I started to feel a different kind of exhaustion. Not the ache in my back or the heaviness in my eyelids, but a tiredness that settled somewhere between my stomach and my throat, like my own breath had thickened. It was the kind of weariness that no sleep or hot bath could fix. It was soul deep. I kept caring for him, cleaning his wounds, changing his dressings, sharing bits of my meals without raising suspicion. But something inside me had shifted. What once felt like protection now suffocated me. I began avoiding his face. The air in the room seemed hotter when he was awake. And when he moved, even slightly, my shoulders would tense without me meaning to. It wasn't fear of what he might do. It was something more confusing. The sense that I was no longer in control of my own choice. That initial gesture, the instinct to hold him when he first arrived bleeding, had stopped being a decision. Now it was an obligation, growing and feeding off my silence, a pact I didn't remember signing. I started noticing things I'd missed before. His eyes, for instance, once expressionless, now carried something I couldn't name. Not anger, not gratitude. It was a kind of calculation, like every one of my movements was being observed, weighed, and that made me withdraw, not physically, but emotionally. I began acting on autopilot. Every touch, every task became repetition, no longer care. And still I couldn't stop. In the infirmary, I spoke less, listened less too. My colleagues thought it was grief catching up to me, or burnout, maybe even a breakdown creeping in. No one pressed. That's one thing war allows. You can fall apart in silence, as long as you don't disrupt the rhythm of things. At night, my dreams twisted into something strange. I'd see the room where he was hidden stretch wider until it merged with the entire infirmary. Sometimes everyone knew he was there, but no one reacted. Other times he'd walk freely through the post, head held high, and no one saw him, only me. And when I screamed, no sound came out. It was like his presence was consuming me, not violently, but like damp mold growing slowly through the walls until they forget how to breathe. On a particularly overcast day, I brought a basket of clean laundry to the back room. He was sitting up staring at the wall, like he was waiting for something, or someone. And that's when I realized something terrible. He no longer looked sick, no longer looked like he needed me, but he was still there, waiting, as if he knew that even without chains, I couldn't leave him. And that's when it hit me. The hiding place I had made for him was also mine. That morning the breeze carried the smell of damp leaves and fine dust. A strange kind of silence hung over the medical post. Not the silence that comes from the absence of sound, but the kind that suspends everything we think of as normal. It was the 6th day without heavy movement, no direct attacks, no new casualties. The bodies had stopped arriving, but the silence, that didn't stop. It grew, swelled, as if I'm itself was waiting for something to be done. Trying to distract my mind, I went to gather clean clothes from the old barn, where a few volunteers had turned forgotten, belongings of transferred soldiers into an improvised storage. It was a place no one liked going. Too much dust, too many rats, too many memories clinging to stained fabric. But I needed something to do. Anything to pull me out of the spiral of questions I could no longer answer. That's where I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. A crumpled cardboard box sat in the corner, its edges bent and corners marked with names smudged in charcoal. Inside, among thick socks and yellowed handkerchiefs, there was something that looked out of place. A small pocket-sized book with a faded light blue cover. The pages were yellowed, the title nearly unreadable. But I recognized it immediately. It was the same prayer anthology my grandmother had given me as a girl. Words for when the world falls silent, she used to say. I'd lost my copy years before I enlisted, and now, there it was, tucked between remnants of war, as if I had left it there myself in another lifetime. I sat on the floor, right there among the dust and rags, and turned its pages with trembling fingers. The prayers were still there. Simple, almost childlike. Words to soothe, to ask for direction, to remember what's right when everything feels wrong. I've never been religious. Not really. But those words were more than faith. They were memory. A piece of me that had gone quiet since I started hiding a man beneath cloth and lies. Something shifted inside me in that moment. Not a clear decision, not a sharp break, just a soft vibration, a callback, as if that forgotten part of my story, the girl who still believed that saving someone was always the right thing, had come knocking on the doors of the woman I'd become. That night I returned to the storage room with slower steps. I carried the book with me, not sure why. When I entered, he was lying there, eyes open in the dark, as always. But something in me had changed. I looked at him differently, with a distance I hadn't allowed myself before. And for the first time, I didn't feel pity, or anger, or obligation. I felt a kind of clarity that cut me from the inside out. What I was doing, no matter how justified it had seemed in the beginning, no longer held. I had strayed from myself. But now, the path back was beginning to appear. Slow, steep, but possible. I closed the book in my hands, firmly. The worn cover trembled slightly, as if it could feel what I couldn't say. That night I slept with it under my pillow, and for the first time, I dreamed of the sound of my own name. After finding that book again, I tried to change my habits. I started lingering longer in the infirmary, avoiding the path to the back, taking on tasks that kept me far from the storage room for entire stretches of the day. It was as if, by forcing my feet to go elsewhere, I could rewind time, undo the act of hiding him, slowly, like folding away a sheet until it vanished in the morning light. But it didn't work, because what we hide for too long grows, and it feeds on us. I stopped bringing food so often, cut back on the nightly visits. I began telling myself silently that I was just waiting for him to recover fully, that once he was strong enough, the best thing would be to let him go, disappear without a trace. I imagined ways to sneak him out the back, send him down a safe path, release myself, guilt-free, from his presence. But deep down I knew it wasn't him who still needed me. It was the secret itself that had grown larger than any desire I had to end it. Bit by bit, I noticed the world around me shifting. A sergeant asked if I'd seen any strange movements near the barn. Another nurse, too naive to know better, said she'd heard noises from the storage room and thought someone might be living there. I started to feel the noose tightening, though there were no visible walls, just a constant sense that time was running out, and I no longer had a place to hide inside my own hiding place. One afternoon, while reorganizing the supply box in the infirmary, I accidentally knocked over a stack of clean compresses. As I bent to pick them up, I saw that my hands were trembling. This wasn't just fatigue. It was as if my entire body was tired of holding up a lie. My own flesh was beginning to betray what my mouth refused to speak. I kept asking myself how a decision that had felt so human, so natural, had turned into this web. When I first saw him bleeding, alone, forgotten, my instinct was to help, to do what I was trained to do. But now, I was trapped in something that kept moving even when I stood still. The secret had become autonomous, a living organism made of hushed footsteps, sidelong glances, held breaths. I tried writing a letter, to myself, to the future. I wrote that I did what I could, that I tried to stop in time. But I stopped halfway through. I couldn't finish it, because some part of me still didn't want to let go, and that hurt more than any wound I'd ever cleaned. I started dreaming of hallways. Long, dark, windowless. I dreamed I was running through them, searching for a way out. But every door led back to the same place. The storage room. Always the storage room. Always him, sitting there, waiting. There was no going back. What I had hidden had already taken up residence inside me. It was on a pale morning, wrapped in thick fog, that I sensed something had shifted in the rhythm of the bass. The footsteps were more restrained, conversations shorter, glances crossing paths with a new kind of hesitation. It wasn't panic. It wasn't chaos. It was that kind of silence that comes before a storm. Not the kind that falls from the sky, but the kind that rises from within. It took time before I learned the reason. A soldier had gone missing. One of ours. Young, recently arrived, his face still untouched by deep scars. No one had seen him since the night shift. His bunk was made. His belongings untouched, but he was gone. No note, no bag, no trace. Just a void where a name and number used to be. A blank spot in the morning count. The news hit me in a strange way. Not because of the disappearance itself. War swallows people. But because of the timing. The unsettling synchronicity with something I couldn't quite name. I felt a sharp tug in my chest, an urge to deny any connection. But coincidences, when they pile up, stop being coincidences. I began to mentally rewind everything that had happened in the past few days. My absences, the longer gaps between visits to the hiding place, the way he, the wounded man, had stopped looking like someone recovering and had become something else entirely. Someone who was simply waiting. Waiting for what? The fever was gone. The wound had healed. But he remained, silent and steady, as if he were part of the floor itself. I thought of rushing to the storage room, of searching everything, digging through every corner. But something in me hesitated. A small memory surfaced. Days earlier, while changing his dressing, I noticed something different about his backpack. A space that once seemed hollow now slightly filled out. I didn't look inside at the time. I didn't want to know. Maybe because some part of me already knew what I might find. That night I lay in bed with my eyes open. The missing soldier's absence felt bigger than it should. I began remembering other absences. Small inconsistencies in the head counts, offhand comments, schedules that didn't line up. All the details I'd brushed off now aligned like puzzle pieces, refusing to lie. And even without proof, a question stormed through me. What if he, the man I saved, the one I hid, the one I kept alive against every order, wasn't just an old threat? What if he was still a living one? I couldn't keep the nausea down. I got up before the sun rose, walked to the storage room without lighting a lantern. The wood groaned under my feet like it too, doubted my decision. I opened the door slowly. He wasn't there. For a moment I thought he had run, but then I saw it. In the corner where the basin of water and cloth used to sit. Something new. A neatly folded uniform. It wasn't his. And on the chest, a name stitched in thread. The same name that had vanished from the list. I stood there for long minutes, frozen in the doorway, the folded uniform at my feet. Like I'd stumbled over a corpse that didn't bleed. It was just fabric. Just stitching. But it felt like flesh. Flesh belonging to someone who had vanished without a trace, and now returned, not in body, but in presence. That garment, clean and arranged with almost reverent care, spoke louder than any open wound ever could. And still, I denied it. Denied it with every inch of my being. I convinced myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe someone had mixed up belongings. Maybe the young soldier had been evacuated. Maybe all of it, all the timings, all the signs, was just some grotesque alignment of coincidences. And maybe the uniform, that uniform with his name hand-stitched into the chest, had been left there by someone else. But the more I searched for cracks to escape the truth, the more it wrapped around me, like a late afternoon shadow, stretched out, inevitable. For days I avoided the storage room, invented new tasks, extended my shifts, faked aches I didn't feel. But he, the man I had hidden, kept returning to my thoughts like an unwanted mantra. No longer a memory, a presence in my mind, pacing the edges of my awareness with deliberate steps, as if studying me from the inside out. I began watching myself in mirrors, in the dull reflections of grimy windows and metal basins, trying to figure out what I had done to my own face. The darkened under-eyes, the slumped shoulders, the mouth clenched even at rest. It didn't look like me. I was no longer the nurse I'd been in those early days. I was something else entirely. A woman shaped by a story she couldn't yet tell, and maybe never would. At night, the dreams grew worse. I dreamed I was cleaning wounds that never closed, stitching gashes on faceless bodies, and in the end they all wore his uniform. I'd wake with the sheet tangled between my knees, drenched in sweat, with the taste of rust in my mouth. My entire body felt like it was begging me to end it. But what does end mean when the choice was yours from the beginning? When the mistake didn't come from outside but was born inside, your own act of mercy? The uniform stayed in the room. I didn't touch it. Left it exactly as it was. As if leaving it untouched could somehow undo it. If I just kept pretending it wasn't there. But inside me, something had settled. A bitter certainty. He knew what he was doing. He always had. From the very first moment he looked at me, not asking, not begging, not apologizing. The truth was simple, and that's what made it hurt. He didn't need me to survive. He needed me to see him as a victim. Because as long as I saw him that way, he could keep moving. And I was the perfect piece to keep his game in motion. I started to wonder if he had ever truly been sick at all, or if from the very beginning, the one poisoned had been me. What took me back there that day wasn't courage or clarity. It was an old kind of exhaustion, a fatigue with no clinical name, one that settles slowly into the bones of those who carried too much for too long. I no longer knew what shift I was in, or what day of the month it was. The infirmary's calendar was smudged, the meals had lost all taste, and my body felt like a reliquary of absences. That's when it happened. A surprise inspection, a new commander, strict, methodical, young but with eyes that had clearly learned how to sniff out lies. He announced that certain areas of the post would be reviewed, including the storage rooms, the back areas, the places where there might be irregularities. Those words cut through me like a warm blade. They didn't hurt right away. They just opened me. I watched the movement without breathing properly. I saw young soldiers walking in pairs, moving through corridors that had always been forgotten. I heard footsteps approaching the door to the storage room. The storage room I hadn't visited in 3 days. The place where I had planted a seed of silence that now threatened to bloom into a scream. But then for some reason I still don't understand, they passed it by. Maybe it was distraction. Maybe a mistake. Maybe someone pulled their attention elsewhere. I don't know. All I know is that the door was left untouched. And so was I, on the outside. Inside, everything collapsed. That night I returned to the hiding place. It felt like walking into a desecrated altar. Nothing in there held meaning anymore. The air was stale. The smell had changed. He was gone. Again. The uniform was still there, neatly folded. But this time there was something new. A small piece of paper, almost invisible, folded beneath the metal basin. It was a note with no recipient, no signature. A simple message, written in thin, deliberate handwriting. The words chilled me. Not for what they said exactly, but for how they were said. It wasn't a threat. It was a quiet fact, as if to say, in other words, I'm still here, even when you don't see me. I didn't cry, didn't shake. I just sat on the floor, facing the wall that had once served as shelter, and let time slip past me without trying to hold it back. The question was no longer whether I would turn him in, because deep down, I knew I couldn't. Not out of cowardice, not even out of loyalty, but because after everything, what remained of him was also part of me. To expose that man would be, in some way, to expose myself, to shine a light on places filled only with dust and layered shadows, to shatter the mirror where, for months, I had seen a version of myself, even if I didn't want to. But keeping him hidden also meant allowing my memory to be shaped by hands that weren't mine, by decisions I hadn't consciously made, by a story that no longer belonged to me. I was cornered between 2 ways of disappearing, and neither one felt like a way back. There was a night when the fever returned, not in him, in me. My body finally started reacting to what my soul had been carrying for months. The heat climbed up my neck, my skin burned, but I knew it wasn't illness. It was moral exhaustion. It was my body speaking with the clarity I had refused to hear. You've crossed the line, and now you have to choose what to do with what's left. I spent the day in bed, the sheets clinging to my skin, the taste of iron in my mouth. I remembered the first time I saw blood on the fields. I remembered the train that brought me here. I remembered Joseph, always Joseph, and the way my father looked at me when I said I was going to enlist. All these fragments came in short, tangled waves, and between them, the wounded man's face. Not as he was at first, but as he became. Ambiguous, unsettling, incomplete. It was that afternoon I made my decision. I wouldn't turn him in, but I couldn't protect him anymore either. So I did what was still within my reach. I started with a list. A fake one, quiet and discreet, without any official seal. An invented list of routes and protocols that no longer existed. I spent hours assembling it with trembling hands, like a paper map that led nowhere. But if it ever fell into the wrong hands, it would only reveal what had already collapsed. Then I tucked the folded paper inside the uniform he'd left behind. A symbolic trap, a quiet signal, a reminder that I was still there, that I saw, that I felt, that I was no longer a passive piece in a game he might still believe he was controlling. But even that gesture, small, almost childlike, consumed me, because it reminded me that the time I lost with him would never return. The days I gave to his silence might have been used to save someone who truly wanted to live. The hours I spent stitching his wounds could have eased someone else's pain. And yet, I chose. I chose him. And now, I had to live with that. That night I reinforced the latch on the storage door. I scrubbed the floor with cloth and vinegar as if I could wipe away the memory of his presence. I emptied the basins, burned the cloths I'd used, not out of fear of traces, but as a kind of mourning, a quiet funeral for the bond that had slowly unraveled me. When I finished, I sat in the dark for a long time. The wind cut through the cracks like always. But that night, I didn't feel cold. I felt a strange kind of relief. The kind you feel when you finally set down something far too heavy to carry, even knowing it still exists, right there beside you. I didn't know if he would ever find that paper, or if he would understand, but it was all I could do without completely breaking from myself. It was my way of saying, I know what you are, and now you know what I am too. It took exactly 8 days for him to return. Not like before, not wounded, hunched over, or exhausted, but whole, clean, and yet unrecognizable. Or maybe I was the one who could no longer see him the same way. I was coming back from the infirmary at dusk after a long shift, filled with empty vials and discharged promises that never came. The light was low, that deceiving golden hour that makes everything look more beautiful than it really is. I crossed the yard with my shoulders tense, my eyes fixed on the ground, and then I felt it. I didn't see him first. I felt him. A chill crawled up my spine, not like fear, but like recognition. Like when you step into a dark room and know, without seeing, that something has been moved, that someone passed through where they shouldn't have. I raised my eyes slowly. He was there, on the other side, leaning against the wall that separated the barn from the storage room. Arms crossed, expression blank, wearing a different coat, clean boots, shorter hair. He looked like part of the scenery, almost like a painting. But there was something about the way he breathed, a calmness that didn't belong in that place anymore. I didn't go to him, and I didn't run. I just stood where I was, fists tucked into my pockets, feet rooted in the dirt. We didn't exchange a gesture, not a single word. The world carried on around us as if nothing had ever existed between us. No secret, no war, no silence. And that's when I understood. He didn't come to threaten me, or to thank me, or to ask for anything. He came so I would see him, because somehow he knew there was nothing I could do anymore. He knew time had passed over that hiding place like a silent avalanche, and now all that remained was dust. He had survived, and I had been just part of the passage. I stood there for long seconds, my chest beating in a strange rhythm. 1,000 thoughts rushed through me. Scream, call someone, confront him, run. But I did none of it. For the first time, I didn't react. And in that non-action, I found a kind of freedom. He no longer controlled me, no longer lived inside me. What remained was maybe just the reflection of a choice I refused to repeat. He turned his face slowly, walked in the opposite direction, and disappeared among the trees behind the barracks. No rush, no trace. I stayed there until the sky went completely dark. Later, when I returned to my room, I found something that shouldn't have been there. On my bed, carefully placed, was a piece of cloth, folded in quarters. The same white handkerchief with little red flowers I had used to stop his bleeding on the first day. It was clean, unstained, but his scent was still there. After that day, I never saw him again. No news, no signs, not even a rumor. It was as if he had never existed, as if time had swallowed it all. His presence, his steps, his hollow eyes, the scent of dried blood on his sleeves. And still, he remained inside me. Not as a figure, not as a threat, but as a crease, an internal fold that doesn't always hurt, but never stops weighing. I spent the following days in silence, working on autopilot, as if my body knew what to do without needing me to think. I helped the wounded heated water, closed wounds, all the same as before. But nothing was the same, because I was no longer the woman who once knelt on hard ground and held a stranger with the strength of a sister. That Eloise had stayed behind in the storage room, between the stained cloth and the promises that never came true. Now there was another woman living inside me, one who knew the bitter taste of doubt, one who understood that even the most beautiful gesture can become shelter for something that destroys, and that changes everything. It changes the way you walk, the way you look at others, the way you listen to whispered prayers in the middle of the night. It changes silence, because silence after a secret is different. It has layers, it has sound, it speaks without words. Every day it told me I wasn't guilty, but I wasn't innocent either. I had saved someone, but not out of heroism, not out of duty. I saved him because I wanted to, because something inside me recognized a plea that was never spoken, and still pierced me clean through. But what wounds me to this day isn't what he did afterward. It's what he took. He took my certainty, my faith in myself, the belief that I'd always know right from wrong when the moment came. He took my clarity, my pure impulse to help without hesitation, and left in its place a fog, a kind of opaque film between me and the world. Since then, I've become someone else with my patience. I still care, but with more questions inside. My eyes scan beyond the visible wound. My fingers touch the body and try to sense what's not exposed. I've learned to look at men more carefully. And sometimes when I come across someone with very calm eyes, I remember him. That look that no longer asked for anything, that just waited. The white handkerchief stayed with me. I folded it and placed it inside an old Bible no one reads anymore. From time to time, I open it and stare at the cloth. It still carries his scent, faintly. I never washed it. I don't want to forget completely, because forgetting would be lying to myself, and I've done that long enough. Now I understand. There are wars that don't end with white flags or hymns. Some keep going inside us, in the dark rooms of conscience, in the gestures we no longer make, in the person we stop being. And this is the longest war I've ever fought. Months went by. The war, as we used to call it, began to change its face. The bombings grew less frequent. The names on the reports felt more distant. But even as the sirens quieted, the sound inside me remained. Not like an alarm anymore, but like a steady beat. A memory that refused to be silenced. The base was slowly emptied. Some went home, others were reassigned. Many simply disappeared from the records. And with each absence, something inside me sank a little deeper. There was one afternoon, gray and windless, when I realized I would never return there. Not the way I once had. And that's why I decided I needed to open the door, one last time. Not because I expected to find anything, but because I couldn't go on without seeing what was left, without facing the place where I got lost, where I went silent, where I did what no one should have done. I pulled the key from the back of the infirmary drawer. It was rusted, nearly useless, but still recognizable, like me. I walked the path toward the barn. My shoes kicked up light, fine, almost white dust. The storage room stood exactly where it always had, still forgotten, untouched since the last time I reinforced the latch. I opened the door slowly, feeling each groan of the wood like an old sigh. The air was thick, stale, but not hostile. It was like stepping into a reliquary of pain. Everything was still there, just as it had been. The chair against the wall, the dry basin, the cloth folded neatly in a corner. But something had changed, or maybe for the first time I could see it with the right eyes. I walked to the center of the room, knelt, touched the floor where he once lay, closed my eyes, and for a moment it all returned. The smell of blood, the heat of fever, the weight of a body that didn't know if it wanted to live or just be remembered. But this time I didn't feel guilt or regret, just a kind of old tiredness, a hollowing out. I opened the Bible I carried under my arm and took out the handkerchief. I placed it on the floor, folded carefully. It was my final gesture, a ritual with no witness, not for him, but for me, for the part of me that had remained trapped inside those walls, for the woman who nearly stopped existing because of a secret that wasn't hers, but chose her to keep it. I closed the door gently, locked it, held the key in my palm and stared at it for a while. Then I tossed it into the tall grass behind the barn. No rush, no remorse. I never went back. But sometimes when the wind shifts at just the right angle, I can smell that room again. The dense heat. The memory that insists. There is no hiding place where the conscience cannot reach. And now, I knew that, with every piece of me. Sometimes people ask me how we return to life after the war, and I always smile with a kind of sorrow, because the truth is, we don't return. We continue. Just like rivers do after they've overflowed their banks. The current is never the same. The path changes, but it flows on. I keep going. Today, at 91, I live alone. My body doesn't respond like it used to, but I still make my own bed, warm my own tea, and gently wipe the frames where time insisted on settling. My days are made of soft routines. Birdsong at the window, the groan of wood beneath my steps, warm water over swollen hands. And in the middle of it all, he still shows up, not in nightmares, but in flickers, in memories I didn't ask for, but that come anyway, like wind through a forgotten crack in the wall. I don't know his name. I never did. Sometimes I think he chose that he lived without identity, as a way to survive. Other times I think he carried too many names and decided to leave me only with silence. But the strangest thing is that, with time, I realized the name he left behind was mine, because after him, I was never just Eloise again. I became the one who saved the man no one should have, the one who hid the soldier, who may have betrayed his own, the one who cleaned wounds that no flag could justify, the one who mistook mercy for surrender, and still, I'm here. I no longer search for answers. I don't need to know what he did, or why. The truth about him is smaller than the truth about me, about what that moment did to me, about who I stopped being, and also about who I had to become in order to keep moving forward. For many years I didn't tell this story, not out of shame, but out of respect for the silence it carried. Not everything needs to be spoken to be felt. But now, closer to the end than the beginning, I feel there might be someone out there, someone who needs to hear this, not to judge, but to recognize themselves, because sometimes we don't lose ourselves out of cowardice. We lose ourselves out of love, out of compassion, out of the unbearable ache of watching someone die without a name, without a face, without a human touch. And maybe, in the end, this story isn't about him, or even about the war, but about what's left when everything ends. About how we go on breathing after courage peels our skin and fear teaches us how to go quiet. If this story found a wound in you, maybe we're healing together, without even knowing. And if that's the case, stay here with me a little longer, leave a comment. Or don't write anything at all. Just listen. Sometimes just listening is enough, because there are things that were never on the list. And still, they happened. And for that, they deserve to be remembered.